All right. So I now want to introduce our keynote speaker, which, get this back up. There we go. Introduce our keynote speaker, Mandy Logan. Following a series of 5 strokes and major head injuries, Mandy is no longer in the construction engineering industry. She used her life hacking prowess from a non-traditional background to reestablish neurocontrol using her electrical system, her tongue against her teeth. And and so now, as a happy dyslexic, autistic person, she's pursuing all things InfoSec with an emphasis on incident response. Pressing forward, trying to improve lives of InfoSec professionals, long-term ethical neurotech for those unable to express themselves to their own satisfaction. She enjoys art, travel, naps, speaking, continuing broadening her own recovery, and good people. Mandy's always hopes to be half the person that her service dog Trevor is. He helped her relearn to walk. We almost had Trevor come with us, but he didn't make the trip this time. But I first heard about Mandy through my friend Paul Asadorian on Security Weekly. He shared with me the story. It was really inspirational. So I'm really thrilled to have Mandy here today. So please help me welcome to the stage Mandy Logan.
Good morning, everyone. I really want to take a second and just say hello and thank you. I mean, thank you to RVAsec, to Jake, Chris, Karen, the vendors and sponsors, and then to everybody that is here. I feel like this is such a fantastic opportunity that we get to come together for a shared interest. I mean, we all have interest in incident response or cybersecurity, any part of information security that you happen to be interested in, and yet we are so much more than just our jobs or just our titles. So today we're going to expand more on that. This is not a technical talk. So stick to your guns and your purpose. I titled this Courage from an O-Day Inside. And notice that it's not from inside an O-Day. This is not talking about when you're actually in your team or doing those things or when you locate a breach, but from actually experiencing a complete 0-day internally. Okay, so as I noted, this is a deeply personal talk. I don't think that's a problem, considering that I am a person, and every single one of you is a person. Whatever you are internally is what you bring to your team. It's what you bring to your career. It's what drives your goals and your plans and your passion. So previously I did work in more construction engineering and a lot of things all construction related. Now I am passionate about technology, especially technology for autistic children, autistic nonverbal people, and for the community, the InfoSec community. And I'm very big and interested in equality. There's a strong push for there to be more women in technology. Previously, when I was in construction, there was a push for there to be more women in construction. I would like to share this little statistic because me coming from a construction background and now being disabled, I feel like we hear a lot about, well, there need to be more women, we need more diversity, you need more inclusivity. And what I did in the construction world, it was 3% female. In InfoSec, what I've heard is varying terms around 21 to 24% female. And I see an incredibly broad base of very good-hearted people who are actively and willingly accepting of any and all people who want to pursue information security. So here's a principle that I always have gone by. No matter who cuts your check or how you spend your hours, you work for yourself. You are your own best employee. You are your own best boss. So even if you make no money, even if you fail at what you were trying to do, and you face setbacks, you're still working for you. All of those setbacks, all of those problems that you face are part of you crafting you. So I'm going to touch on a pretty massive time. Whenever I was not making any money, I failed at everything that I tried to do, and I faced numerous setbacks. I'd like you to take a few seconds and consider this question. Have you ever had a serious close call? Those moments when you go, wow, that could have gone much differently. Or, man, I might have lost everything if that had gone differently. Well, I wasn't lucky. It wasn't just a close call. It was absolutely worst case scenario again and again and again. As it says on the screen, I was wiped to the abilities of a 6-month-old. So if you want to talk about a complete reset, pretty much being human and being lightly alive, but being nothing of what you were previously, that's what I encountered. And here, I'm going to ask that you recognize that because I minimized recovery time, and I hacked my way through certain aspects of it, it does not mean that it was a lesser impact or that I skipped any step in recovery. I think sometimes as humans we tend to think, oh, well, they bounced back, or oh, I saw them doing this in a few weeks, or this in a few months or something. And yet we need to have the compassion and understanding that when people are going through things, it is never compassionate or appropriate to minimize what they are going through. Okay, here, these are some of the things that I've faced. I would like you to look through this list and find a couple of things that you identify with. As you can see, there's psychological, emotional, physical, learning disabilities, family situations, abuse, poverty, low self-esteem. There have been many, many things that I have faced. So find those couple of things that really resonate with you. Because in going through all of those, every single thing that I've overcome, the one underlying principle to them all is they all took courage. So with what you are facing, what you identify with, and how you want to handle it, it takes that courage. So we're discussing some pretty heavy stuff right here, but ultimately understand that my objective is we are going to highlight how safe we genuinely are. Now, we talk about security a lot, right? We discuss security constantly. And what we're looking for is it not a feeling, it's a feeling of safety. So I would like you to look at my experience as not the what ifs of, oh my God, that could happen to me. I'm here to say this doesn't have to happen to you. But if you're going to give time to what ifs, then please look at the what ifs of, what if this never ever happens to another person in the world? How great would that be? What would be the impact if it never had to happen again? Look for the positive what ifs. And look at the fact that I am here, I am standing, I'm talking, I'm breathing, I'm generally comprehending. That even in worst case scenario, you do have what it takes to get through and thrive afterward. So even if you want to look at it besides just how safe we are, you can look at how resourceful we are, how capable we are, how inherently intelligent we are. So yes, I was wiped to barely being able to breathe, barely being alive at all, and still, look at your teams, look at your employees, look at your families, your friends, and then yourself. Even when you are facing struggles or you have setbacks, humans rule. we are still doing fantastically well. So here's a brief timeline for the talk. We're going to have a video, and then we will discuss the life before the O-Day, or the injuries and all that, what happened then, and then from the O-Day to the time of the video, how I hacked my recovery, what were the starting principles, because those elements of capability, those elements of my work history, my background, and then courage were what came together in order to facilitate a very fast recovery. So we're discuss my guns and purpose, meaning why I lived. Then the challenges, some of the hacking, some of the reverse engineering I did, and finally we'll discuss some of the resources that I can hand over to you that helped me. So, before we begin, breathe. Take this moment, we're going to let the outside world be completely outside. Breathe. Know that your guns and your purpose are already with you. This isn't something else you have to go search out. They're already in you. And always do what you can, where you are, with what you have.
It's Thursday, July 16th, and I am trying to sit and work on a puzzle. I don't know if this will pick up the sound coming from the hallway, but it's someone's TV or something, and it's destroying me. I realize I slowly lose ability to overcome it and even make words. It makes me so sick, even while wearing earplugs. I have really bad pain in my left side and my left brain, especially in the back, and the whole brain feels slow and fatigued. I'm sitting cross-legged on the bed because it's more stable to me. It's either this or laying flat. But if I lay flat right now, since everything is spinning so much, I won't also be able to record this. Right now, my left side doesn't seem to be there if I don't look at it. Even my head and straight down doesn't seem, it feels like a black hole, like there's just nothing there. If I were to stand right now, I would not know where I am or where my side is. My brain hurts so badly, and this feels like it's killing me to try to think or make words. I want to vomit. And pass out. Hi, another little documentation on the dizziness and internal palpitations. I still definitely feel it. This is Sunday, I think the 21st of September. I went to the emergency room on Friday, the 19th, and the palpitations and dizziness were incredibly intense, then got worse and worse as time went on and day, but it is occurring. It occurred lightly yesterday. Yesterday I still had major problems with speech. It was about a quarter or a third of this speed, and with a very strange stuttering and like mouth shaking thing that I've never experienced. The first time was Friday in the ER. So right now I'm sitting up in my wheelchair. If I turn, it's especially trying to look to the side. It's like my eyes are rolling or flipping back and forth, and I feel this flopping or like electrical response through my chest. It's not just centered in my heart right now. just kind of through the chest cavity. Standing, I do tend to fall over, and it's really hard to figure out how to stop if it's physical falling or just in my brain. It's like that looking down or up into peripheral vision makes it worse. Thank you.
Okay. So those two videos I want you to think back on, because those videos were taken at extremely high functioning moments. That was completely out of the ordinary. And say like the first video, I had spent approximately, at that time I spent 23 and a half hours a day in dark silence laying flat on my back. That's how it had been for, at this point, almost 2 years. There was no distraction, there was no TV, there was no music, there was no reading, there was no texting, there was no talking to anyone else. Those weren't possible. So think from like the first video, I had spent 3 solid days trying to figure out words in order to put them together. And that was done with just laying in dark silence, barely eating, barely doing anything else, them not moving me, nothing, so that I could try. I was trying so hard to get words across to the doctors. We'll go a little bit more into that, but think about it. Like, you're looking for help from these experts, but every time they walk in, you are laying there completely unable to move, to talk, to do anything. Who else knows what's going on inside of you while that's happening? So it was a life or death thing that I figure out communication, and that I figure out communication and how to get my brain and body and all of my parts to start communicating together. Between the first video and the second video that were shown here, these were during, I had made a lot of progress before the first video. I pushed too hard, had major setbacks, and that actually impacted to where I had another event that caused complete paralysis on my left side, which I had not been dealing with quite the same before. So then we're looking now, have a whole new set of issues because a different type of injury had occurred, partly because of having medication that was incorrect that started causing internal chemical burns. Between those two videos, I spent about 33 days in a level 3 locked psychiatric ward. I was so suicidal that it was just a cold, hard fact to me. It was completely illogical to try to continue. There was nothing else to pull from. I will say that I am grateful for the psychiatric help, for the care. I feel like there's so much stigma around being in you're in a psych ward. And this was the type where, yeah, you were completely locked in, and you're not even allowed a spork. There's no floss. There's no, you were given paper scrubs and nothing else. And you're with some pretty interesting people inside. And still, I want you to notice that through that, did you see how my speech had improved from the first video to the second video? That's important. There were still milestones along the way of improvement, even with dramatic setbacks, and being completely at the point of there is no way to continue. Okay, so before the video, I'm breaking this into 2 time slots. So we have birth to age 32, and then we have the O-Day at age 32 to the time of the video. That was about almost 2 years, 21 months to 2 years. I can tell you absolutely that the trials, the difficulty, the torture, the pain, the problems of those 21 months definitely surpassed all of the pain and problems and trauma, and I had not had an easy life in any respect. It surpassed the effort, the energy expenditure, the everything that had gone on the prior 32 years. So let's go back a little bit. So from the, kind of hard to see up here, I guess, but from this video, this picture, I'm sorry, that is my father. And if you can see right here, that's me. So he owned construction companies, and he bolted, I was firstborn, so he bolted child seats into the equipment with him. So from 9 months old and on, I went in the field with him. I was out running equipment. So when I say I grew up in construction, it's like, yeah, I had, at age 4 and 5, like I spent time in the office. I didn't go to preschool. I didn't do anything else. I worked in construction and ran equipment. So throughout life, then I continued in the construction avenue. I worked on, eventually in more environmental engineering and construction management. I didn't put any pictures up here of construction sites because I think you know what a construction site looks like. So there were everything from small multi-family home tracts to large hospitals and university buildings and highly sensitive environmentally protected areas that required very particular care. So part of my job was actually sliding down ravines and sliding down into the bottom of canyons to take water samples, and then trying to figure out how to get back out of it because I had to do this during rain, so before, during, and after rain. That was part of my job. I also did commercial interior finishes. So the picture on the other side, this is, you can't really see, there's a woman's head right here. So this is 12 feet tall and 5 feet wide. It's one of 2 copper waterfalls that I made for a project that I worked on. So, and they mirror each other. There's dioramas, there's paint, there's a lot of other things that go on in the interior finishes of large commercial hospitality, offices, and assembly hall meeting places. This one I was very proud of. This was a very huge, I had a privilege of doing some really fantastic and interesting things prior to the injuries. Okay, so I was rather active. I did quite a lot. At this point, right before it, I lived on the beach. I walked the beach in the morning. I ran. This contraption that I'm on, if you're not familiar with it, it's called an elliptigo. It's an outdoor elliptical machine, and it is brutal. It is one of the hardest things that you can ever do for strength, coordination, balance, and I lived on hills, so when trying to go up and down, that not only looked ridiculous and took a lot of nerve and guts to go out in public with it, but it was also, when I see this picture, this remained with me later on, as that if I could get back to that, I would know I had recovered. The picture on the other side. So when I was 24, I got full custody of my youngest sister. So I raised a teenager from 13 to 21 while working for myself, going to school, and doing hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer work. I put this picture up because I felt like it showed that angsty teenager stuff that whenever you're raising children or you're working with teens, you know that it's so much more complex and so much more rewarding than just, oh yeah, I raised a kid. So I had done a lot of traveling, like I said, a lot of volunteer work. I worked for many, many years with the Organization for Jehovah's Witnesses because many people don't know that they do all of their own volunteer construction work and have a very massive disaster relief and construction recovery program, and often are on site before even Red Cross is available. So I had worked with those, and I had worked with French-speaking refugees and immigrants, mainly from African countries and Haiti. That was my life before September, October 2012. The course of events that took place then did cover a span of a few weeks. And the injuries, the reason I had the strokes was due to being strangled. I was strangled and beaten. I don't remember very much of that. I have certain flashes of things that have returned. I figure if I don't need to know it, I don't care if it ever comes back. But there's certain things that stay with you. I remember, and forgive me because I really hope that you're okay with a little bit of morbid humor. So the reason I would say that I know for sure I was strangled, about 6 weeks after being in the hospital, it started coming back that I could remember and I could feel the strangling. And since apparently I had exhausted my ideas of what else to do in order to stop this, if anyone is familiar with the show 30 Rock, there's an episode where one of the main characters, Jack, talks about into the crevasse. I see some nods. Good. So what that meant was that sometimes you have to go down before you can go up. So when I was being strangled, there was this moment where I guess what made most sense to me, since I couldn't get away, was that I took my 2 fingers, and instead of trying to do anything to them, I put them down my own throat. So I put my 2 fingers down my throat, and I pressed apart my vocal cords and my larynx so that I could continue breathing. Because I figured if I started vomiting or anything else, what did it matter? And I figured the shock value had to be worth something, right? So I remember that exact feeling of, it's not often that you've ever had to pry apart your own vocal cords, and the sweet relief of actually being able to get air through it. I remember a few other things of like my head hitting the pavement, the front end of a car, a few other flashes. I got away, and then what started, but apparently I blocked that whole event out. I just knew I needed to get away. So I got back in my company car, and I fled. I lived in San Diego at that time. I started driving. I had previously lived in Tucson, Arizona. So I started driving to Arizona. And looking back now, I'm incredibly sorry for anybody else who was on the road when I did that, because obviously I was not thinking well. But because not only did I try to get to Tucson, but I went by way of Vegas, which adds about 9 hours to the drive. This went on to then, I was reported missing. Eventually, I was found on the side of the road in the desert by the sheriff's department and all that, and transported to an emergency room. I was completely non-responsive at that point, but in the emergency room, my body started having spasms, and I started screaming and doing different things. So they eventually released me, saying that it was probably an intense case of the flu. So friends from southeastern Arizona came, picked me up. I went to their house. So I was at their house for a few days, and the strokes started happening. Eventually, we discovered that was because of a torn artery in the back of my head. The artery walls had torn, and it caused a blood clot inside. When that blood clot started breaking apart, that's what led to the strokes. So we're going to choose one day of one of those as our O day. And we're going to choose that day as October 8th, 2012, because that was the day that one of the emergency rooms finally saw enough combination of symptoms to understand that it was neurological. I was still barely functioning or talking or doing well at all, but it wasn't until that day, and still they were saying that it was meningitis or that it was something else. They finally took CAT scans and MRIs because I was vomiting constantly. And a very interesting thing started happening. My eyes operated completely separately. So that, I'm grateful that that started happening, because that was the cue that allowed the emergency room doctor to finally find that one of the strokes. So when he came in and he goes, "You've had a significant stroke, we're transporting you immediately," because I was out in the middle of the country at a very small county hospital. So they transported me. I will say that from that day, I have memories of being put in transport. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrifying what was happening inside. But I also took it as that, okay, this is what I'm doing now. Everything else no longer mattered. This was what was going on. So turns out I had massive concussions. In fact, this headgear is a concussion prevention device, because the concussion actually never stops. So anytime I bump my head or anything like that, it's a full-blown concussion and usually has days or weeks of massive repercussions. Kind of funny, repercussions, but the concussion happened. So I had 5 or more strokes. They kind of quit at some point counting or caring. At least one of them was a brainstem stroke. I'm going to bring this up because cerebellar and brainstem strokes do not present as normal strokes. They happen in about 1% to 2% of all stroke cases. They usually happen to younger people. They generally happen because of maybe doing extreme yoga moves and tearing an artery, doing something that impacts the arteries at the back of the head. So it's a very uncommon injury, and of the very few, there's very, very few people who ever live through a brainstem stroke, and fewer still that ever get out of being locked in. So I'm very grateful that I get to actually be here and share this with you. It's not common. And that led to me having to do a lot of my own recovery, because they had not had somebody live through it before. And because of that, a lot of doctors, professionals, all that refused to work with me because they would not take on the liability. And as they told me later, they only expected death for me. So we're going to take this 0 day. We have a mostly torn artery. We had the strokes, have concussion. I already had congenital hemiplegic migraine. So let's just say you have a massive migraine thing going on top of this. I put suicidal here more to bring up that the emotional impact of what was going on. The PTSD and the suicidal part was already there from the trauma of what had caused these injuries. I had no insurance and no money, and I was now completely pretty much locked in. That means I was completely alone. So that is our starting point. And this is for you to kind of give an idea. Imagine like all of your insides are on the outside and they're all on fire. So you're on a nonstop tilt-a-whirl. Your pain level and nausea are at 10 plus, and every second you cannot tell if you have limbs. You can't make sense of anything that's going on around you. You know it's life or death. You're locked in and you have a 3-second memory. This was my starting point. That's my O day. Now, breathe. Again, I am not bringing this up to be dramatic or to make you scared, but to go, that was simply what was going on, and I had to figure out a way to get through it. So breath is what it came down to. It was not guaranteed. Breath was not guaranteed constantly, but it was what I had right then. So we're just going to talk about like 3 main points through these 22 months. Cavewoman. There was a long period where there was no internal voice. There were no words. There was nothing inside besides this giant cloud of incomprehensible data. And then whenever words did return, even inside, it was cavewoman talk. Like, that was it. It might be want water, want water. Internally, I'm saying that 80 or 90 times over and over and over, but I can't communicate that to anybody. So how am I going to make advancement and get this across? Now, consider the impact that you're suddenly have gone from being very active, having all these goals, all these plans, to you're completely dependent. You're completely bedridden. They are having to move you, bathe you, dress you, and even in that, I couldn't be moved. Because of the torn artery, a lot of it, I could not be physically moved or touched at all in case the artery continued to tear. It was too close to the brainstem to do surgery or to repair it, so that meant not only was I incapable of moving, but it meant that for about 9 months I had to stay almost completely motionless while we hoped that the artery healed. But think about being completely dependent. If you go from right now to all of a sudden you have to be moved and held by 2 or 3 different people while they are cleaning you, while they are taking care of you, while they do anything and everything that they need to. That alone is like a shocking, horrible thing for somebody who'd always been completely independent and enjoyed taking care of myself and others. So as I said, I couldn't be moved. That meant no connection to my limbs. I was not completely paralyzed, but I had no control over my limbs. So let's do inventory time. Right now, in that, this was what I had. I could stick to my guns. To me, the guns were principles and tools that I had on hand. Now, if you can read the first one, it says, think God's thoughts. This is not saying, oh my, I now have the mind of God. This was like an internal thing that I developed over those years of, I would try to look at myself from the exterior and think the highest, cleanest, best, most robust thought I could at any time and look at it from the happiest point that I could. I also became very adept at all of those months and years of laying in dark silence alone with just my own thoughts. Then I would also look at it from, hey, let's look at like, what are good things that God or somebody else or somebody that is not going through this right here could be looking down on. So I had developed, and that worked to develop words that worked to create imagination and to help me cope with being so locked in and being alone. This is a very huge factor to me. No one owes you a single thing to make your life more convenient. Not your parents, not your mates, not your children, not your bosses, not your employees. Nobody owes you a thing to make your life more convenient. That does not mean you are not worthy of everything, and yes, you should absolutely expect good things. But if you look at it from that no one owes you a single thing that makes your life more convenient, you can become more responsible and a heck of a lot more appreciative of every single thing that anybody does that does make your life more convenient. So one of the absolute biggest things for me was humor. As the strokes were going on and they couldn't figure out why and there was no stopping, and at one point when I still had internal thought, I remember thinking, okay, if this is going to continue, what is the one thing I don't want to lose? For me, it came down to humor. Because I figured that I could lay there, if I could still hear people doing things around me, I could still have some kind of idiotic running commentary in my own mind that would be entertaining for me. And if there were angels or somebody else or something else that could listen in, then shoot, maybe they could laugh too. So humor became like the core thing that I was not willing to give up. One of my tools was I had years-long spiritual practice. I do not have a clue how anybody could have gotten through that if I was not already accustomed to meditation, quietness, and prayer. Those were already a habit for me, so I was able to fall back on that. That was a huge tool. I had breath some of the time. Breath was not constant. With the brainstem damage, that affects homeostasis. So my lungs did not always work. My blood pressure was different one side of my body to the other. My core temperature dropped constantly. If they repositioned me, like say maybe my lungs were working pretty well while I was laying flat, they moved me to adjust a bedpan or do something, my heart rate would drop to 30 because I could not process the stimulation of being moved and also keep my heart functioning. So there were countless hours of it being that internally I had to develop a pattern and a way of gauging how much energy I had to breathe. So it came down to, I have this much energy and I can go breathe, 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 don't breathe, and trust that I had enough oxygen until my body could take another breath. But I did have breath, and I could control my tongue. I had my tongue pressure against my teeth. And so that was muscle resistance. I could control my tongue, and I had muscle resistance of my tongue against my teeth. Now, my purpose, or an end goal. And to me, it was key to have a purpose, not a plan. A purpose meaning that you know your final destination you want to get to, doesn't matter how many times you change. So I wanted to, well, and here's the key point too, I think. It wasn't that, oh, I must live. I think I didn't know that I was supposed to, or I was even allowed to die. I think it was just, this is what we're facing now and let's get through it. I had always been very big on efficiency. I wanted to do it efficiency, and I wanted to get back to that stupid elliptigo machine. So I needed to find a way out. I needed to figure out how to make connections and how to prove that all of the fluff was external, meaning that all the softness was external and I was still strong and capable inside. I had to know what was going on inside, though, in order to do that. There was this cloud of overwhelming data. So the first thing that I remembered, this is one of my guns, was there was a prospector that my dad had worked with when I was 10 years old. He would go out panning gold. I remembered one of the very first memories that came back to me was working with him because he would do dowsing. He would create an electrical circuit with the metal with his body and then use a non-conductive material, and he could test out exactly what materials and in what percentages were in those metals simply by the electrical circuit that he created with holding the metals and using a test ball. I remembered that, and I figured, okay, my entire body is an electrical system. He said everything is electricity, so I knew that somehow, and I knew then that I could use my tongue to create electrical resistance, meaning that if something was good, right, true, or on, that my muscle would stay strong. If it was bad, no, or off, it would go weak. So I had basically an on-off or binary system internal. That was what I started with. This took a lot of trust. So people would come up and start talking to me. I could not comprehend what they were saying, but I trusted that somewhere in my body I had known this somewhere before, and I couldn't speak, but they would talk to me. I would trust my body. I would use my tongue against my teeth. If it stayed strong, I said yes. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. I didn't know if they were going to bring food. I didn't know if I was going for another test. I had no idea what was coming after that, but my body had said yes, so I was going to trust it. So if you want to talk about getting good on your gut instinct, do it. Learn to trust yourself before anybody and anything else. You can alleviate a lot of heartache from your life. So I started to wrangle this cloud, and I call this analog binary style. All of these impulses, feelings, things that were going on internally, I had to figure out a way and build a new platform in order to comprehend them. What I came up with was I started breaking them into categories and creating internally a branched system of categorizing whatever was coming in. These were the primary ways that I did that. So again, if I was feeling something, I would isolate that, and then I would test with my tongue if it was mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual. Then I would start going through subcategories, and as long as my tongue stayed strong, I started associating a certain word with a certain impulse, a certain feeling, or a certain overall energy or electrical signature that I felt. That was how I began to rebuild everything inside. So if you look at that and you go back to that, you're very perhaps analytical, or you're very introverted, or you're very good at systems engineering, but that has nothing to do with emotion, or this and all that. In my experience, it is all one in the same. So the point was that even when I looked calm, I might have looked like I was just laying there, I was working. I worked constantly on this. In fact, in those 2 years, I did about 350,000 rounds of starting to comprehend words and emotions and feelings and impulses and sensations by testing them through these branched structures until they started to become slowly, very slowly, more automatic. You could say I was obsessive on it because the pain was so bad, and I figured what I could do was at least open up bandwidth. I couldn't go in and repair a brainstem or something else directly, but I could open up bandwidth of all of this data that was just overwhelming me, and then my body could go and fix whatever else was going on. I also had to start determining what wasn't mine. There were impulses, feelings, sensitivity, things that were going on, and I had to recognize that some of it wasn't mine. And I started doing that by looking for a common electrical signature that I could put whatever that impulse was with someone, pair it with someone that was around me, pair it to somebody else, and if that was it, I had to start creating filters that way because I had none that had been built over life. I found those common electrical signatures, and then it would try my hardest to push that stuff back on somebody else because I had enough of my own stuff going on. In everything that you're doing, every challenge that you face, and even when you find a really good plan that you want to enact in your life, your career, your family, anything, you have to find the motivation. For me, with relearning to say to control a limb, to control a hand, I needed to relearn to write. So I did that by writing my name. Then I figured, well, I need to know how to write my name and my address. What I did was found motivation to do this by hearing of the HGTV Dream Home Giveaway. So I wrote out 450 entries for that. And then I coerced people into getting me stamps and envelopes or whatever. But that meant I had to write out 450 envelopes as well. But my writing improved. And one funny thing about it was as writing returned, for a long time, I could only write mirror image with my left hand, where I had always been right-handed before, but I could only write backwards with my left hand. It took time to flip over to be able to write what you would consider normal. How I dealt with this was relegating everything to that trust system and to that platform internal that I had created. I relegated numbers, decisions, the trust that something was good for me or not, all of that to my body system and to the muscle resistance of my tongue against my teeth. For example, this that you can see here, I didn't logically choose what color to put where. As I was relearning to use a pen, I would muscle check for which pen to pick up and then which thing to color. So it was done purely by removing any decision-making or stress on me that way. I just did what my body said to do. This led to massive improvement long-term and formed the basis for all of the recovery that you see. So an example, let's say on one day, I would check what my body could handle and I would do just that. The overall goal might be to move my left arm, but I could check and say, well, I can handle opening my eyes 4 times every 4 hours. I could set up for 20 minutes. I can do this. I can visualize it this many times exactly, and that is precisely what I would do. Every day, constantly, I recalibrated to what was best for my system, and I did that. This eventually worked for working with meds, supplements, everything. I started to be able to gain control and know, and that took a lot of courage to stand up to the doctors and say, no, what you're prescribing, like I take your advice, but no, I know what I need. So I felt like with doing that, I felt like I kind of coiled like a snake ready to spring. I was really calm and quiet, but I retained a lot of information and got ready, and then at times I would have massive jumps forward in my ability. As I said, it faced a lot of setbacks constantly. This has not been a linear path, and you know that. You know your careers aren't, you know any goal you're going after, nothing has been linear. So the setbacks are not a problem, it's just another learning opportunity. One quick kind of funny story. In one of the first acute care hospitals I was in, because I had done a lot of volunteer work, I had worked with organizations, I had a lot of people come to visit. I was not capable of receiving people, but the nurses kept track of who came to visit. I found out when I returned to that hospital to say thank you to them that the staff had been under the impression that I was some type of real estate heiress. I'm like, what are you talking about? When I left that hospital, I had $40 that somebody gave me. I had one pair of men's sweatpants. I had a purse that had been run over, and I had a broken bra. That was what I had completely in the world whenever I left, especially after the 3 years in hospitals and nursing homes. But at some point, they thought that I was an heiress, which actually meant that I got better treatment in the hospital. So I'd say nurture those volunteer and friendship and work, those work relationships you do have, because you never know when they might pay off for your health later on in very unexpected ways. So one thing that I would say to you is that when you're facing a choice or challenge, you rarely need more information. You might need very few specifics, but most likely you already possess everything you need to know in order to make the best outcome possible. You might need more quiet, you might need more breathing, and you might need more self-trust. And as I have done it, you can figure out your own way and you can increase every one of those. Also figure out what's yours and what's not, and get rid of the stuff that is not yours. And I highly recommend humor. I highly, highly recommend using humor. So if you stick to your guns and your purpose, you can succeed no matter what you're facing. And this might be in your day-to-day thing. Like say at work, there's some challenge that comes up, a breach happens, anything like that. You can apply all of these principles in your own way to that exactly. Do what you can where you are with what you have until you have more, then modify to your purpose. You don't change your purpose, you just now increase and enhance what you are going to do to get there. So, stepping back from the video, that was, 2015? So to now, I think from the video to you seeing me right here, you can see there's massive improvement. It's not stopped. I still do all of those same basic things all day, every day. I don't operate the same as I did before. I don't operate the same as most anybody I've ever met. I have different abilities, I have different limitations, but I am genuinely finding happiness and joy and satisfaction in being precisely who and what I am now here. I can't get on an elliptigo yet. At some point, we'll try to get back there again. I still spend about 85% of my time alone, and most of that is still in dark silence. But I do stick to my guns, the tools that I use then, and to my purpose, and I continue to expand no matter what. So between the video and now, eventually I was able to be in a wheelchair. The first year and a half, 2 years, I couldn't be because my body could not systemically handle being moved through space. Eventually I was in a wheelchair. Then eventually, as you can see Trevor there with me doing aquatherapy, that was who helped me relearn to walk with hundreds of hours in the pool, relearning how to handle it. And he would pull me to the stairs as I paralyzed or fatigued. Then he would help me get out onto the ground and lay there, and then he would help me once I was capable of getting back in the wheelchair. So those of you who came to see him, I understand that, but there's no refunds. He couldn't come. So one other thing is I get to be here with you all now. I get to speak and talk and move and breathe and handle things and enjoy life now that I didn't. And in those years, there was no hope put out for me to ever be able to. Thank you all. May your guns always serve you well. And this will be in a slide deck. This is a list of therapies and aids that I used. And if you have any questions, you can definitely reach out to me on Twitter or by email. Thank you all very much.